Hi, I'm Shirley Esthimer, and this is Artspace. Today we have something very, very special. The Walpole Footlighters here, and I'm going to introduce my guests, Peter Bradley, Mary Ann Finney, and our own Mike Laracy from the fire department. Thank you all for coming.
Thank you.
I'd like you to tell me just what's going to happen this weekend.
Well, why don't you start?
Okay. The Footlighters is going to present a wonderful play called The Guys. It was written by Ann Nelson in the weeks following the 9/11 attacks. She connected up with a theater company that was down near Ground Zero, and they wanted to do something, to honor what had happened. And they wrote this play in about 2 weeks.
I saw that, yeah.
And they put it on as a staged reading initially in December 2001 with Sigourney Weaver and Bill Murray. And it has continued to be performed since then. At the Footlighters, we wanted to do something to recognize the 10th anniversary of 9/11, and we thought that this would be a wonderful thing to offer the community. And then because it's about firefighters and the sacrifices that they made, we decided that we would use the production to raise funds for the Walpole Fire Department. So I contacted Mike and said, would you guys be willing to support this? And they said yes. So
absolutely.
So we're doing 3 performances, 9th, 10th, and 11th of September. And we hope that people will come see it because it's really to honor the Walpole Fire Department and the people in the fire department who went down to help at Ground Zero, and just for all the sacrifices that they make for us and the work that they do for us to keep our community safe.
Well, this play, believe it or not, has been done in 46 states and other countries.
Oh, they missed a few, huh? 4 states? Yeah, it's a fairly popular play. I've seen it a couple of times because it's 2 people. It's a very simple set. And it's true. It's based on the true experiences of the playwright, Ann Nelson, who worked with a fire captain from the New York Fire Department to help him write eulogies for the men that he'd lost.
Which would have been an overwhelming task for him.
Yes, yes. When he comes in, he's shell-shocked. I mean,
Right.
Peter, you play the captain.
Yeah,
So.
yeah, I mean, and the show portrays that. I mean, the great difficulty that he had. In the story, this fire captain has lost 8 men, and it's just completely devastated him. And he's just not sure how he can approach this and make the very unusual connection. One of Joan's speeches, Marianne's character is Joan, is about how there are very few circumstances how these 2 people would have connected, and that's part of what the story is about. Is about these about connections, about courage, about brotherhood and humanity. It's a terrific story,
And I think it's going to be just the right length too,
right?
because it's very intense.
Yes.
So you don't need a 2.5, 3-hour production like we get
Right.
in the theater these days.
No, it's about an hour and 20 minutes or so. It's a 1-act. And although he's lost 8 men, we only talk about 4 of them. And we basically tell the stories of these 4 guys who were first responders.
Right, and that's one of the wonderful things about the play is that when you talked about the department, the fire department of New York lost close to 350 men on that day, and one of the difficulties is when you talk about those kinds of numbers, they become almost anonymous. And the wonderful thing about this show is it humanizes these men, and you learn about the 4 men who are doing the eulogies, and you learn about the fire captain himself, and the kinds of people there were and the lives they led, and it brings real flesh and blood and humanity to the people who made, who sacrificed everything.
Yeah.
Now, this play involves 2 monologues.
4.
4?
Get 4.
I'm glad you straightened me out on that. How do you prepare for a monologue as opposed to just regular script?
Monologues are actually easier in a lot of ways because you don't have to listen for any cues. You start it I mean, I start at the beginning and I just start repeating lines over and over and over again until I've got it. The dialogue sometimes is harder because, in fact, in my case, I'm always asking questions of Nick. So he's got lots of stories to tell, and I have to remember what question comes next. So that's been actually more of a challenge than the monologues.
Now, Mike, how long
Yes.
have you been playing the role of the Walpole fireman?
Well, as Walpole Deputy Fire Chief, I'm coming on 6 years next week, September 12th. And I've been in the fire service in November, 25 years full-time, altogether since 1982 when I was in high school. So I was I was a junior firefighter. So I was allowed to leave school, which was awesome at the time, leave high school, and go to brush fire. So I started my career in 1982. So I think that's 29 years this December. So it's been pretty much my whole life, the fire service.
Why do you think they're using the monologue? What does that do for does it come at the beginning?
Each of the monologues comes between the scenes where they talk about one of the guys. So the monologues for Joan are her way of reflecting on what's happened, on her reactions to it, and she's talking to the audience. This is not just talking to the air. This is actually talking to the audience, and she becomes kind of the voice of the observer, the people who saw what happened, heard about what happened, reacted to what happened, but didn't quite know how they could help, because that's how she feels at the beginning. She wants to help, but she can't. And the only thing she knows how to do is put words together. She's a writer. And so the monologues, the play opens with a monologue, and then after each discussion of each of the guys, there's another monologue. So we see through the monologues the way she comes to grips with what has happened and what her role can be in it.
Right.
Have you been in a situation as a fireman where you had something overwhelming to deal with?
Not to this extent. I hope I never do in my career. It's probably fire chief's worst fear, to have a firefighter die in the line of duty, to die. Period. While active. I did have a firefighter who lost his infant son, while we were on duty. So we responded to the call, and that was probably the most severe that I've ever witnessed, which was awful too. So, and like Pete said, they had 343 firefighters in New York die that day.
I can't wrap my mind around that at all.
Yeah, I mean, town of Walpole has 32 firefighters. So, I mean, just comparison there. You're talking 8 firefighters that he has to write eulogies for. That's a whole shift for us.
Right.
Working every day. It's 8 firefighters.
Right. Yeah. It was. So devastating. And Nick reflects on it. He tells Joan at one point that in the bad years they lose maybe 6 men, and here they lost 350 men. Almost 350 men in an hour. So it's just absolutely overwhelming to them. But and Deputy Chief talks about how he hasn't lost any men, and God willing, never will. But one of the things that I think we reflect on, and I've reflected on a lot as we prepared for this play, is, there are certain professions that where the men and women go into harm's way while the rest of us are running away, and we owe a constant debt of gratitude to people who are willing to risk their lives on our behalf, whether it be police or fire or military. It's an extraordinary profession.
Well, my cousin was in the Pentagon when the plane struck him. She won't talk about it. It's just, it's
Same thing, my brother-in-law, his office was next door, and people, where the plane hit, and people in the next office died. And he actually assisted them. He got he's in the Navy, captain in the Navy, just recently retired. He got a medal for his acts of that day, but he still cannot talk about it. So, and here's a guy who's been trained his whole career for combat. you know, and it was just that emotional for him.
Right, yeah, I understand. My father was in World War II and never would, he told the funny stories, but he would never tell,
Right.
never tell the
Yep.
hard
Yeah.
stories.
Yeah.
Well, and one of my monologues in the play talks about that people need to tell their stories, but they don't want to share them with their friends and their families because they don't want to cause their listeners any more pain. And, you know, how do you... I mean, that's one of the things that Nick is doing in the play, is he's sharing these stories with Joan, and it helps in the healing process a bit. But it is hard, and it's very overwhelming.
Now, I understand that they have healing dogs that have helped people who go to the site.
Yeah, yeah. I have actually never been down to the site, so...
Yeah, I have not either. But we did have one firefighter, call Lieutenant John Lightbody, who was part of the FEMA's Urban Search and Rescue Team, who on 9/11 went down with the team. And they were actually the first team. They're situated throughout the country, different teams. And Massachusetts, based out of Beverly, was the first team at 9/11.
Well, I didn't know
To set
that.
up, yep, so the very first FEMA team in there. So,
I don't know if I should tell this, but I think it's okay with him. He has an album of
Yes, he does.
pictures.
Yes, he does.
yeah, you know, when he brought out the pictures the other day to share with the Footlighters,
Yeah.
and he's more than willing to share them with anyone. So of his experience that, you know, that day, that week, I think they were there for about a week.
Right.
Because they don't just go for a day. They set up camp and assist. So,
Right.
He said he's at some of these fires where they drop him on the top of a mountain that's on fire, and 3 weeks later,
he's gone to many
he
wildfires
slept
across the
on the
country.
ground.
Yeah, he's got a lot of experience doing, you know, stuff like that, John. Just came back from Vermont.
I understand.
Him
that,
and another
yeah.
one of our firefighters, John Hamilton. So they both were in Vermont, assisting that state. You know,
the flooding.
with the flood and
Yeah.
the devastation, you wouldn't think of that. You know, with a hurricane, not a coastal state, but they were there as part of FEMA.
Right.
So
My son happens to be a psychiatric social worker taking care of a lot of mentally ill children, and he's on the Massachusetts disaster team.
yep,
And he was called after the horrendous hurricane down New Orleans.
Yeah.
He was sent down to Otis Air Force Base in the middle of the night when they were waiting for a plane of refugees. And the people, he said, he just will never forget it. They stepped off the plane and all they had left with paper bag with whatever they could salvage.
yeah.
Getting resettled up here, and
Resettle in a different climate.
yeah,
You know, they're not used to the cold
Yeah.
weather, which they all had to go
And-
through that winter.
Yeah.
he said he was absolutely stunned when a 3-year-old child got off that plane who had lost his family.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. You know, you had talked about the site at 9/11. About 3 years after, my wife Nancy and I were down in New York for a holiday, and we visited the site. And at that time, the site itself was cleaned up, but a nearby church that had become a center of action where they managed things had been turned into a little bit of a museum. And if you can walk through that museum untouched,
Yeah.
there's something wrong with you, because it is absolutely overwhelming.
Yeah.
I mean, it sends a chill down your spine to think about what that city and the country went through in those days. So I think it's important to come back to the play. It's important for us to remember that, remember all the sacrifice, and remember what people went through, and remember how important it was. And one of the wonderful things about this play is it's not about the attacks themselves. It's not about terrorism. It's about humanity and the way people responded to it.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It's a terrific thing.
Yeah.
Well, Mike, now, you obviously at some point, you were in intensive training for disasters.
Right. Well, you know,
Some of the-